Imagine a history so unique that even today it is mostly misunderstood. The timeline, the events, the humanity, the personalities, experience heroes larger than life. Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Christophe, Alexandre Pétion, and their women who guided them through the complexities of national and international diplomacy, administration, trade, and politics. Suzanne Simone Louverture, Marie-Claire Heureuse Dessalines, Marie-Louise Christophe, Marie-Madeleine Joute-Lachenesse. This is not just history. It is the story of resilience, of hope, of triumph, and of tragedy. Follow the love story of John and Marie as they navigate their lives and their future in the midst of a colony in upheaval. Now, author Daniel J.D. Bayard brings it to life for you. Winner of International Impact Book Awards for Historical Fiction, celebrated at Fifth Avenue, New York. Featured by magazines such as Quest, Palm Beach Illustrated, Society Palm Beach, Haiti Open, and many more. Recommended by Book Treb as a must-read and by Christopher Mager, former president of Time Life, and dozens more reviews. These are irresistible page-turners you'll find hard to put down. Now, Daniel Bayard brings his knowledge to audiences nationwide with an exciting lecture series that educates, enlightens, and entertains audiences who appreciate the significance of history. Triumph to Tragedy by award-winning Haitian historical author Daniel J.D. Bayard.
Book one, which I started with, when I started researching my family. Did anybody ever do a family tree? Everybody ever try that? I did. It's a disaster, okay? It was terrible. So what happened is I went back and Jean Bernard gave me our first ancestor that was born in France in 1683 and arrived in Haiti as a young man in 1710. And this book one is about his grandchildren. This is Marie, all right, but Jean-Baptiste was actually his grandson. And they were born in 1750. So at the age of 21, in Jérémie, which is a small town in the south, they meet. Jean-Baptiste, he had been to school in Paris, and he had studied in Europe, and he was pretty sophisticated at the time, but was from that little small town. Marie had never left that town. So it's a love story where they begin their life, okay, they get married, and they're totally in love, all right? I'll warn you in advance, it does have some sex in it, so if you're a little shy, be careful of those parts. But they're totally in love, and they begin their life in the colony of Saint-Domingue. So Saint-Domingue is a precursor of Haiti. It's the French colony, and in the late 1700s, it was the most wealthy colony in the entire planet. It was called the Pearl of the Antilles, and the city of Cap Français was basically the Paris of the Caribbean. So how rich was it? 60% of all coffee that was drunk in the world was grown in Saint-Domingue. 50% of all cotton grown in Saint-Domingue. It was the leading exporter in the world for sugar. Okay? And it had a shipbuilding business. Leading exporter in indigo. So it was a very, very rich colony. As a matter of fact, 52% of France's tax revenue was derived from Saint-Domingue. So Jean joins the French colonial army, and one of his assignments in a group called the Chasseurs Volontaires de Saint-Domingue was to go to Savannah, Georgia. And this is a particular monument in Savannah, Georgia. And this guy here, Henri Christophe, he was 11 years old. And it's a funny story because he's actually from St. Kitts. So the French were taking on water in St. Kitts, and he was a slave that was escaping from a terrible, horrible British master. So the kid stows away on the first ship that he could find. And the ship takes off, and they find the kid. Chapter 2, I think. Book 1. They find the kid, and guess what? The ship is on its way to Savannah, and it's part of a fleet for the Comte d'Estaing to help the American Revolution, okay, in Savannah, Georgia. If you ever have an opportunity, go to Savannah, Georgia, Franklin Square. I was there with my grandson, took him, and that's the monument that's in Savannah itself. It's a great, great monument. So during this colonial period, you have to understand that if you had any color of African descent in you at all, you had no rights. So if I was there, I would have no rights because I have African descent in me. So that was the gens de couleur, they called them. And these two guys here, this guy here, Vincent Auger, and this guy's here, Jean-Baptiste Chavannes, okay? In 1793, they petitioned for rights of the gens de couleur. Auger, on the left, didn't care about freeing slaves at all. But Chavannes had an ulterior motive. He wanted the slaves to be free. So they battled out a little bit, but eventually they had a slight little rebellion. They got caught and unfortunately died a very gruesome death because that was not tolerated at the time. And they were actually dismembered by the French government in the public square. So 8 months later, okay, that brought rise to a voodoo ceremony by a couple people, Duddy Bookman and Cecile Fatima, and they had this ceremony and they brought in the slaves, you know, the slaves that really had the power of persuasion and the different plantations together, and they had this voodoo ceremony and they decided that slavery can no longer be. Oops, what's going on here? So they put together an army. These two guys here, Georges Biassou and François Papillon, were the leaders. And there was another guy by the name of Boulet, but he was so brutal that these two guys killed him off. Okay, he was too brutal. Okay, and they basically go against the French military government. There was a uprising. There was a particular date that they say, hey, okay, we're going to uprise on this particular date. There was a terrible storm. It was a great omen. And lo and behold, they revolt. But the French colonial army put down this revolution in no time. And they were really brutal to those rebels. And what did the rest of the rebels do? Most of them were killed, but a lot of them went over, okay, with the army to the Spanish side of Hispaniola and joined the Spanish colonial army. Because at that time, remember I told you that it was a rich colony. Well, Britain wanted a piece of the colony, Spain wanted a piece of the colony, so now they had this ready army that disliked the French to begin with, so they inaugurated them as auxiliaries to the Spanish colonial army, and then they sent them back to Saint-Domingue to begin fighting against the French. At this particular point in time, this gentleman here, who had joined as a medic, his name is Toussaint Louverture, one of the greatest men ever to exist. He joined as a medic and quickly became a commander. And he started to have incredible victories, taking over French territory on behalf of the Spanish government. But what happens then? Oh, by the way, in my books, and I have a very big affection for women because I was raised by women, right? I have 3 sisters, I'm the only boy, and I had a very strong mother. So in all my books, okay, Mary, and you guys read it, women are pretty much very highly placed. So Suzanne Louverture was really Toussaint Louverture's right arm. So at the end of book 1, Toussaint joins, okay, the Spanish auxiliaries. And the way that I write my books is that when book 1 ends today, book 2 begins tomorrow. All right? So it's a sequence that happens. So in book 2, it's called The Rise of Toussaint Louverture, and the first one was from 1771 to 1793, this is 93 to 98, and we find Toussaint in the midst of the Spanish colonial army having great success conquering French territory, large swaths of land on behalf of the Spanish. And that's basically his army, right? So now, by the way, this is a guy by the name of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, which I'm going to introduce separately because he deserves a separate introduction. But what happened in 1794 was particularly interesting. This gentleman here by the name of Jean-Baptiste Belay, who was born a slave, who purchased his freedom, who became a French legislator, was sent to France as part of a contingency, and went and argued in front of the French legislature in February of 1794 for all slaves in the French Empire to be freed. And guess what? They voted yes. Because at that time the king had already been deposed. Okay? Well, I should say beheaded. So that's an incredible story there. So Toussaint Louverture, who is now back fighting for the Spanish, and Spain still had slavery, says, hey guys, is Spain going to abolish slavery? They said, what are you talking about? We don't do what the king, it's the king's thing. So basically he does an about face, volte-face. He turns sides and he leaves the Spanish. He asks François Papillon and Biassou to come with him. They decide to stay with the Spanish, and he goes back to the French side to fight on behalf of the French, because now the slaves are free in all French territories. Britain had invaded, the country as well. So after he was able to win back large swaths, or just about every single town and city that he had conquered on behalf of the Spanish, and to show you how great he was never a military guy. He just learned this by reading, okay? He went and he conquered the British. The British had basically taken over Port-au-Prince for 3 years. So they were severely entrenched also in the south. Jacmel, Jérémie, and all those areas there. Lecaille, they were entrenched completely in the southern peninsula, and he vanquished the British Army. So here you go. He vanquishes first the French, comes back, fights for the French, vanquishes the Spanish, vanquishes the British. He's awarded, medals by the French government. And guess what? They make him the governor general of the colony. The richest colony in the world, he is now governor general of. He went behind France's back, and this is a great story. The American Revolution would not have succeeded without France. Okay? That's a fact. France provided material support, including shoes, uniforms, guns, everything, including soldiers. And when France, gave the United States a bill to pay the money back, at least a large extent to it. So now, Toussaint, is in Saint-Domingue. The American government says, you know what, France, you know that money we owe you, all those millions? We don't owe it to you. We owe it to the King of France. And by the way, you chopped off his head. So we don't think we owe you anything at all, because he's the one that gave us the money, not you guys, not you revolutionaries of France that did the French Revolution. So France had a contract, had a treaty that they could not go to war with the United States. So what did they do is they were real sneaky, and they got their pirates, their privateers, to start attacking American merchant vessels. To an extent, they attacked 320 in a year, either sunk them, pillaged them, or stole them. And John Adams, the second president of the United States, you may or may not know that at that point they did not have a navy at all. They had sold all of their ships in order to finance debt after the American Revolution. So John Adams and Toussaint had a deal, because at that time the United States could not trade with the French colonies. So Toussaint says, look, Mr. Adams, he actually sent an envoy. He said, we'll solve your pirate problem if you trade with the colony of Saint-Domingue. And he said yes. And he went around the French government and made this deal. So the pirate problem was solved. The Americans love Toussaint, and everything's going great. Gentleman on the left is a guy by the name of André Rigaud. So the French now, the agents that were there, the government, they think Toussaint's got a little bit too much power. So they put a wedge between the two top generals, and Rigaud had helped Toussaint significantly in ousting the British. He was a great general. But what they did is they told the guy on the left, hey look, we're going to change things a little bit, You're going to be the commander of the South, and Toussaint is going to be the commander of the North. And Rigaud said, okay, works for me, all right? Because he was a guy from the South. Toussaint said, no, that's not going to fly. All right, I am the Governor General of the colony until I hear otherwise from the French legislature. You agent, you don't have the right to do that. Rigaud says, no, 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 I want the South. So now they go to civil war. And now there's a civil war that begins, okay, on the colony. It ends, okay, where Rigaud tries to assassinate Toussaint, and it begins the next few days in Book 3. And Book 3 is basically the rise of Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So, they go to war. This gentleman here, Alexander Pétion, sides with Rigaud. And he is now in the city of Jacmel, and he is charged with holding the line at Jacmel. The army of Dessalines and of Christophe is outside the city besieging Jacmel. And they're waiting for orders from Toussaint Louverture to come over, and they're going to take the city. A lot of things happen. You got to read this book. It's an incredible book of intrigue and military strategies and all that. But bottom line, in the middle of the night, Alexander Pétion takes his army, or a lot of his army, and escapes from Jacmel. Really pissed off Dessalines, okay? Totally. You're going to love that, the story. So now that Alexander Pétion, Rigaud, and a lot of the other generals from the South have been shipped into exile, he concentrates on going to the east side of Hispaniola, and he consolidates the entire island into one colony. And he proceeds next. Oh, and by the way, what's happening now is Napoleon Bonaparte is orchestrating a coup in France. And Napoleon Bonaparte takes over France, right? All through this time. And how Toussaint was allowed to do this is because there was a lot of chaos going on. So now Toussaint says, you know what? We're going to create a constitution for the colony, which is unheard of. A colony for France was a possession. It wasn't a living, breathing thing that could do its own laws, but Toussaint says, hey, you know something? We're going to promulgate a constitution. And he put a constitutional committee together, did a constitution, sat down, and wrote a letter to Napoleon Bonaparte. Du premier des Noirs au premier des Blancs. Translated, from the first of the blacks himself to the first of the whites, Napoleon. Napoleon gets the letter and the Constitution, which he's already promulgated. This guy had some big stones. Okay? So Napoleon freaks out. He said, he called Toussaint the Gilded African. Okay? And you got to understand, Napoleon was a severe racist. All right? This flipped him out. So what does he do? He puts an armada together, and he says, I want my colony back. His ulterior motive is to reinstitute slavery, to increase production for the slave owners, okay, that had basically lost out because all the slaves were free. So he wanted to reignite the production. So let me tell you how big this armada was. Upwards of 700 ships, 35,000 people on the first wave, ratcheted up to 80,000 soldiers over a 2-year period in 1802 to 1804. Napoleon made a big calculation error. He lost 24 of his finest generals, including his brother-in-law, okay, General Leclerc. He lost somewhere in the vicinity of 30,000 men. Completely depleted the French treasury. This guy was so strapped that he had to sell New Orleans. You remember the Louisiana Purchase? It doubled the land size of the United States overnight. He had to sell Louisiana to help finance all of his debt. And on top of that, he ended up losing the most expensive real estate in the world, which was Saint-Domingue. Real idiot. Okay? So what does he do? He sends this big armada, and long story short, you got to read it because it's a lot of detail in it, but he ends up tricking Toussaint into a meeting, okay, to kind of talk about peace and all that. There was a surrender involved. It's a little bit more complicated than what I'm saying because these books are kind of like a lot of pages, right? So I just can't do it all here. But they end up shipping Toussaint to France at a prison called Le Joux in the French Alps, of all places. And literally, he didn't die in France. He was murdered in France. They took away his firewood. They took away his blankets. They took away any heating source whatsoever. And basically, he died of pneumonia, freezing to death. Well, the guy on the left there, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, got super pissed because Toussaint Louverture was his mentor. The only thing they disagreed on was that Dessalines never wanted to put down the arms, okay, which Toussaint did. Dessalines wanted to continue fighting. Toussaint gave him an order, no, everybody's going to surrender because we're going to play nice with the French government, because the French basically told all of the rebel army that we will incorporate you into the French colonial army, which they did. But when they heard about Toussaint's death, and then when they heard that Martinique had re-enslaved the population of slaves, or the ex-slaves, okay, against the French previous decree, then now they all defected from the army and they built a 40,000 man army in order to go after, okay, the French. Now let me tell you a little bit about this 40,000 man army. 12% of this army of soldiers were women. So if you do the math, out of 40,000, 4,800 were female soldiers, but not only female soldiers, but officers included. So we're talking about females in 1804 giving orders to male soldiers and were, in certain parts, commanders. So it was a complete army. So, long story short, you have to read in the book, really wonderful story. They win the war. The last battle was actually, the anniversary was on Tuesday, November 18th, the Battle of Verchières. And they win the war, and that was a whole story by itself. So that takes us to book 4. So November was the last battle. December 31st, okay, is now, and they're partying, and the last basically chapter of the book, the last page of the book, is Jean-Jacques Dessalines and his wife looking at fireworks because everybody's celebrating. And in book 4, it starts on January 1st of 1804, which is the first day of independence. And that's called the Clash of Pétion and Christophe. Now, you're probably going to remember this name, Pétion, right? Pétion is the guy that was part of the Civil War. He had gone and was exiled to France. He came back with the expedition, fought against Dessalines and Christophe, okay? And then when he heard about the slaves being re-enslaved, all right, he joined Dessalines and Christophe in this revolution. So what's going on here? 1804, we've got Jean-Jacques Dessalines is now the guy. All right, he's the governor general of the colony, and then between 1804 and 1806, he makes himself an emperor. Seizes power, okay? And to understand Jean-Jacques Dessalines, this guy was a mean sucker, okay? He was originally a field slave. He had come up through the ranks and became a commandeur, which is basically a slave driver. And then he became the military man. He learned about military tactics. He actually learned about military tactics from he called her Aunt Toya. And Aunt Toya, that's another really cool story, all right, was a warrior from Africa. And she was caught as a warrior and sold into slavery. But he was a mean dude. And if you could imagine, throughout his whole life, he had never been injured, never taken a bullet, never fallen off a horse and broken a leg or an arm. Guy was scratchless. In 1806, he's assassinated. He couldn't keep the peace. And what happens in 1806, by the way, that's his wife, Marie-Claire Heureuse, wonderful girl, big in healthcare, first nurse of Haiti, very compassionate. The only person that could tame Jean-Jacques Dessalines was that woman there. That's the only one. So these two guys, Alexander Pétion on the left, Henri Christophe on the right. Remember the drummer boy I told you about in the beginning, right? That's him grown up. Okay? So the Senate at the time says, okay, the natural successor for the country to lead it is Henri Christophe. He was the senior general. So they make Henri Christophe the president of Haiti. They say, Christophe, look, Jean-Jacques Dessalines made himself an emperor, so we don't want you to have that type of absolute power because it's kind of dangerous. So we're going to impose on you certain rules and regulations, and we have to make sure that we approve everything that you do. And Henri Christophe says, guys, that's not going to fly with me, okay? That's not the way I deal. And they said, well, that's the way you're going to deal. So what does Henri Christophe does? He mounts a 12,000-man army and marches from the north of Haiti to the southwest of Haiti, and he basically besieges Port-au-Prince. And to force the Senate into giving him absolute power. The Senate gets pissed off and says, no, you are now an outlaw. There's a reward for your head. You're no longer president. And they name Alexander Pétion president. So now Alexander Pétion is there to guard the city. But let me tell you a little bit about Alexander Pétion. The guy was a brilliant artilleryman. He could take a cannon and hit a target in 2 miles. That's how good he was. And he had this tactic that he would put cannon on the top of hills, and he rained terror down on Henri Christophe, on the army. Henri Christophe, with his 12,000-man army, was never able to enter Port-au-Prince. And this all happened after a bloody battle called the Battle of Sibert. He could not enter Port-au-Prince. Pétion held Port-au-Prince, and he took his army back. And around Arcas, he says, you know something? This line here, I'm separating the country in two. I'm taking the north for myself. You guys could keep the south. And he divides Haiti into two. The Grand Nord and the Grand Sud. So now there's two Haitis, two countries. Alexander Pétion is in charge of the south. Henri Christophe is in charge of the north. Over the next several years, he did try to take over again and invade, but that didn't work out too well for him. And two different governments, right? Henri Christophe was a brilliant logistical builder of sorts. He built things like palaces and forts and all sorts of fabulous places. He did infrastructure. He built schools. And because you remember I told you he was British, believe it or not, all school instruction at that time was in English. The only challenge that he had was that he was a brutal dictator. Brutal. Now, my opinion is that I think he turned pretty brutal, because he wasn't that way all the time in his life, when his son died when he was 12 years old, about 4 years earlier. That's when I believe. Is it true or not? I don't know. That's why I write historical fiction, right? If you read my books, they're not school books, okay? They're stories. But they are parallel to history. And who keeps me in shape is my cousin, Jean Bernard, because every chapter I send to him, and he's a historian. He's a 50-year educator. So I rely on him. Or to build a palace, or to build something. You were not allowed not to work. It was illegal not to work. But his colony, okay, became very prosperous. And the British government told him, hey, Henri, you know what usually good leaders do? They become kings. So they talk Henri into becoming King Henry. And now he's the king of the Northern Empire. And by the way, very prosperous. Whereas Alexander Pétion was a laissez-faire guy. He was a partier. You know, he was a nice guy. Everybody, they called him Papa Bon Cœur, father of good heart. He'd take land and he would give it to freed slaves. Okay, so they had plots of land. Everybody loved him. You didn't have to work. If you wanted a piece of land to go over and feed your family, that was okay with him. But unfortunately, in economics, it didn't work out too well, and that part of the colony started to go down in terms of economics. This is the wife of, or at least my interpretation of, the wife of Henri Christophe, Marie-Louise Coy-David, European trained, got her education in Europe, very, very intelligent, very, very well-spoken, and had a lot of influence on Henri Christophe. Not all influence, but a good amount. So she became queen, Marie-Louise. Marie-Madeleine Lachernesse. Oh my God. I love this character. This character, okay, was Alexander Pétion's mistress. Now, the way she grew up was that her father was a French colonel, Colonel Lachernesse. Her mother was a black socialite. So they threw a lot of parties. Her mother was very well-to-do. Her father was an officer. Had officers always, all the time, in and out of the house. And her father was very strict with these guys. And she learned. And when she grew up and she became a teenager and a young adult, she will dress down an officer. Period. In her house. And when Alexander Pétion met her, that's what he liked. She was a strong, capable woman, intelligent, and that's how she became his mistress. So Alexander Pétion dies in 1818, and the gentleman on the right, Jean-Pierre Boyer, becomes president. Because Alexander Pétion, and I'll apologize to Haiti, my ancestor was president of the legislature and signed the paper to make him president for life, Jean-Baptiste Bayard. So he becomes president for life with the ability to choose his successor, and he chooses Jean-Pierre Boyer. Jean-Pierre Boyer was his protege, okay? And Pétion was Boyer's mentor. He was 5 years younger, Boyer, and many of the same characteristics. European trained, okay, and very capable, quite frankly. So Jean-Pierre Boyer becomes president. 2 years later, Henri Christophe, fearing a coup, getting sick, he had a stroke, and he blows his brains out with a silver bullet, commits suicide. And Jean-Pierre Boyer marches to the north, and with the commendation of the generals, without firing a shot, they decide to become one country again. And they unified under the Republic of Haiti. And that's when the two countries now became one. And that leads us to Book 5 and 6. So that is where Book 4 ends, where the unification of the country, and Book 5 begins. So these books, you're going to find in Book 5, who's on the cover? This is Jean-Pierre Boyer and Lachernesse, a.k.a. nicknamed Jute. The Book 5 and Book 6 have the same titles, Unification and Dissolution of Hispaniola. So the unification of Hispaniola and the dissolution of Hispaniola, the Dominican Revolution Part 1, the Dominican Revolution Part 2. I set out writing one book. Let me tell you a funny story. I set out writing one book completely, and I ended up writing 6. Okay, I only wanted to write one book. Okay. So now I start writing one book about this, and I couldn't put it in a book because the stories are fabulous. There's so many side stories, and so much intrigue, and so much love, and so much family, and so much stuff that I had to give it into 2 books. And I love these two. I love every single one of these books, but I love these 2 books. And here we introduce the Dominicans on that side. So this guy here, Juan Pablo Duarte, was a Dominican revolutionary. I'm not going to tell you a lot about him, okay, because we don't have that time, but he was an idealist. European trained, came back to the Dominican Republic because at this point in time, okay, Jean-Pierre Boyer had marched into the West and without firing a shot had unified the entire island of Hispaniola into one. So the entire island of Hispaniola is now Haiti at this point. And it started out really well because the western Spanish side wanted the Haitians to come over, because at that point, Haiti had 800,000 citizens, the Dominican side only had 80,000. So there was economic, trade, there was a great synergy that could happen. So 50% of the people on the eastern side, the Spanish side, wanted to incorporate with Haiti. Then there was three other factions. One that wanted to remain with Spain, one that wanted to be completely independent, and one that wanted to be together with Gran Colombia and Simon Bolivar. So Haiti won out. Boyer marches into the Santo Domingo. They hand him the keys to the city. He says, I haven't come as a conqueror. I came to liberate, from Spain and all that. All right? And now the entire island is one. Juan Pablo, but things started to go bad. Taxation, etc., French indemnity. It's a whole other story. But things started to go bad, and this particular guy, Juan Pablo Duarte, is an idealist. So he wants to become free. These two guys here, Francisco Rosario Sanchez and Matias Mella, were the more practical, the pragmatic ones. Duarte, you can't do this without military fight. No, I want elections. That's not going to work. You got to. So they went back and forth, and finally, Duarte says, "Okay, we're going to do elections." And these guys say, "Okay, if that's what you want." Until this guy Pedro Santana comes along. So I can't tell you the entire story, but it ends up triumph to tragedy. Okay? And it didn't end up too well for Duarte, Sanchez, and Mella. I'll tell you that right now. Book 6. So, books 5 and 6, they've got a lot of pageantry, a lot of parties going on in the presidential palace, a lot of stuff happening, a lot of political intrigue, things behind the scenes, military conflicts. Haiti at that point had a 40,000 man army, so they were very, very powerful. A lot of military strategies going back and forth. And something happened in 1825 called the French Indemnity, where France came calling with the bill and said, hey, look, Haiti, you owe us 150 million French francs, and you got to pay up. And Boyer said, I don't want to pay. And they said, look, we got 13 ships, and we're going to blow every single city apart if you don't sign on this document. And they did. Okay, so Boyer signed, and that caused a lot of taxation on the people, including the eastern side, and that's when the Dominicans began to revolt. A lot of economic issues. Then, of course, there was the famous earthquake and tsunami of 1843, and that devastated the northern coast, and that put a lot more pressure on Boyer. But he did have some pretty cool stuff that he did do. For example, Haiti was the first to recognize the Greek independence. Without Haiti, Greek would not be independent, or it probably would have been, but it would have stalled because the Ottoman Empire occupied Greece for, I think, a couple hundred years. And the Greeks were trying to get away from the Ottoman Empire. They asked the British, the French, the Spanish for assistance. They said no. And Boyer, remember I told you they had 60% of the world's coffee, right? So they were embargoed because the American government had embargoed them, the French government had embargoed. They were a pariah state. So that made coffee prices go up. Boyer had a lot of coffee, sent them 50 tons of coffee that they sold on the open market for exorbitant prices, and they were able to buy arms and literally turn the revolution of the Greeks. A lot of blacks emigrated to Haiti. There was a mass emigration that Boyer offered to any ex-slave that wanted to come over. He paid passage, gave them land. So he did some good, really good things. And there's a lot of great things in the book about each one of these guys. Great things, bad things, great things, bad things. And it finally ended up destroying Boyer because of the taxation, because of what he had to do to the people to try to pay this French indemnity, and a bunch of other factors. Much too long for me to go through here. You got to read the book. So I'm going to leave you and close with basically reading the preface of Book 5. What's on the beginning of Book 5. And once again, the cover of this book is Jean-Pierre Boyer and Jute. Jute, remember, was Alexander Pichon's mistress. After Pichon dies, he becomes Boyer's mistress. This woman, for 37 years, was the First Lady of Haiti. She was so powerful that they called her the President of Two Presidents. She was so powerful that she could walk into cabinet meetings and speak her mind, and was allowed to do so by both Pichon and Boyer. She would make or break a career. Very powerful woman. All right, the preface. Jean-Pierre Boyer will be 46 when he assumes complete control of Haiti. His aristocratic features already set in the stern lines of authority. His mixed-race hands, more accustomed to signing decrees than wielding machetes, will nevertheless guide a nation forged in blood and in fire. Behind his polished exterior will lie a sharp political mind, tempered by years of exile, revolution, and governance. His gaze will sweep across the entirety of Hispaniola with the hunger of a man who believes in his manifest destiny to rule not half, but all of an island, as was dreamed of by his predecessors. Yet, for all his political savvy and quick temper, Boyer will not stand alone in his ambitions. The shadow that will follow him, that will sometimes lead him, will belong to a woman whose name will rarely appear in official documents, but whose influence will permeate every corner of the national palace. Marie-Madeleine Lachenesse, Jute, to those in her intimate circle, will have already spent over a decade as the power behind the presidential chair of Alexander Pichon when Boyer takes office. At 44, her beauty will remain a formidable weapon in her considerable arsenal. However, it will be her mind that truly sets her apart from the women of her time. She will navigate the complex racial and social hierarchies of post-revolutionary Haiti with the precision of a master cartographer charting unknown waters. Her fingers will trace invisible lines of power across the political landscape, connecting people and possibilities that others cannot see. Together, they will form a partnership unlike any in the Caribbean. The formal structures of government, the ministers, the generals, the legislators, will provide the visible architecture of power. But it will be in the private chambers of the national palace, in whispered conversations between sheets or over morning coffee, that the true direction of the Haitian state will be determined. Her wishes will become laws. Her disfavor will end careers. Her vision, combined with Boyer's authority, will reshape the future of an entire island. With the north secured, her gaze will turn eastward. The Spanish colony of Santo Domingo, neglected by a Spain embroiled in conflicts at home and revolutions across its American empire, will present an opportunity too tempting to ignore. The entire island of Hispaniola, united under Haitian rule, will become the dream that consumes both Boyer and Lachenesse. For Boyer will represent a legacy that surpasses even the founding fathers of Haiti. For Lachenesse, it will offer new challenges, new power dynamics, new resources to command. But ultimately, for both, it will begin to unravel the dynasty they seek so desperately to build. This book will tell their story, not as perfect heroes or simplistic villains, but as complex human beings wielding extraordinary power in extraordinary times. It will explore the intimate connections between bedroom politics and national policy, as well as between personal ambition and historical necessity. In the pages that follow, Haiti will emerge not as a footnote in world history, but as the central stage upon which fundamental questions of liberty, of race, of emancipation, and of power will play out. This is the story of Haiti's most enduring power couple, of a unified island's brief moment of possibility, and of a dream of sovereignty that will inspire fear and hope across the Atlantic world. Our story begins here. Thank you very much.